So our last talk of the session, the day and the conference is Laurence Livermore from the Natural History Museum. He's going to be talking about a practical overview of the Latimer Core data standard. Thanks.
Thank you. It's not just 10-year-olds that like big piles of poop. So good afternoon. I'm Laurence Livermore. I work for the Natural History Museum London in the Digital Data and Informatics group, along with my co-author, Matt Woodburn. So I'm hoping that I can excite and inspire you with a new data standard. I feel like that's a bit of a tall order for the last session on a Friday afternoon, but I'm going to give it a go. So I think we all have a shared vision of a global data set of digitized collections, so fully digitized collections objects, but we're still a bit away from being able to do that. While digitization and publishing of museum specimens is accelerating, we've got more institutions that have mass digitization programs. Many of us are still only partway through our collections. We're only a kind of small percentage relatively through ours in London. And information about what we hold in our collections is urgently needed by a number of stakeholders. So thinking about how we describe the collections themselves, how we talk about our collections to funders, researchers, policymakers, industry and educators. So all of those have got quite critical needs of our collections. And at higher levels, if we can share data about what we have, we can prioritize digitization and make decisions a lot more easily on how we go about doing the specimen level digitization. But if we're going to kind of aggregate this and create tools on this high level metadata, we need to kind of have things in a shared standard. If everyone shared data in their own format, it wouldn't really be possible to do the interrogation that we want to do. So there's a lot of reasons that we would want to do this. So from the use cases and conversations that we've collected over the years, I think having high-level information about collections can help us think about our digitization strategies. It can help us with our planning, progress monitoring, and impact tracking. It's obviously useful for collections discovery, for supporting management of loans and visits, as well as new efforts to offer virtual access and digitization on demand. Within institutions, collection breakdowns can provide a more informed, data-driven approach to collections management. And they also provide a sustainable collections inventory. Collections descriptions can be used to link groups of specimens to related digital resources and to create virtual collections that span multiple collections. They can be used for tracking citation and attribution and play a role in public engagement, attracting funders and donors. And they can be used to guide collections development, to think about strategy within and across institutions, and also link institutional information and contact information about collections as well, something that we don't really do on a specimen level. So what are the challenges in building a data standard like this? Well, there's a lack of standardization across platforms and data sets. So using different data models and schemas and standards, it really limits the interoperability between those data sets and their ability to be discovered, searched, and building interfaces on top of them. It also means that there's often a big duplication of effort. When institutions are asked to provide data in multiple shapes to different platforms, as I'm sure many of you in the room have had to do over your times working in collections, that takes a lot of time and effort to generate. And we're all busy people, and really, we only want to do this kind of work once and do periodic updates. And it also links into challenges around incentivization. So what do we get from providing this data? What are the tangible benefits to you? For putting that time and effort into describing collections, because we've all got massive job lists and things that we want to do. So I think there's also an issue of sustainability as well. So each separate initiative that is collecting data about our collections is an ongoing investment of resources from whoever is doing that, and requires funding to maintain and update it. And again, there's a limited pot of funding to do this kind of work. So our proposed solution to this is a new data standard called Latimer Core. It's a data standard for collection descriptions. There's a number of data standards already out there, which many of you will be familiar with, like Darwin Core. Darwin Core, for example, is used for describing individual specimens. The Latimer Core is about describing these specimens, these groups of objects together. And this might be for a number of reasons, because specimen level digitization takes a lot of time. So we don't yet have records at specimen level, but we still want some kind of way to describe and quantify collections at a higher level. And that higher level may be as granular as a single drawer, or it could be a cabinet. It could be a whole herbarium. It could be a whole institution. Latimer Core is flexible enough to represent those groups of objects at any of those scales. But for those of you that are kind of thinking, why is that standard called Latimer Core? This standard is named after Marjorie Courtney Latimer. She was a curator at the East London Museum in South Africa, and she was the person who brought the coelacanth to the attention of the world in 1938. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what are data standards and the process of going through making them. So a data standard is a common set of terms with definitions and optionally a set of rules that describe how the data are structured. And going back to the earlier point about why, this allows us to exchange that data in a common format. It supports the interlinking, combination and querying across multiple data sets. And it avoids reinventing the wheel in terms of developing our own data structures. And I want to talk a bit about TADWIG, or Biodiversity Information Standards. Many of you may know it as TADWIG. So this is an organization that provides community data standards like Darwin Core, ABDC, Audiovisual Core, Humboldt Core. This work is unfunded. Everyone who works for TADWIG is a volunteer, and it's represented with a real mix of people across the bio and geodiversity communities. So just a little bit again about the history of Latimer Core. The work on this started back in 2008, and that was on something called the Natural Collections Description Standard. And for various reasons, that didn't get formally ratified or kind of get going. There was limited uptake. So after a bit of a hiatus in 2016, that group reformed. And there were a few conversations around the TADWIG conference that led to the rebooting of an interest group. And anyone can suggest the formation of an interest group in TADWIG to meet the needs of a new data standard. 2018, a new task group was formed to develop this standard. And then there were 4 years of fairly intense working meetings, workshops, virtual barbecues, term definition, and documentation writing. 2023 was a pretty big year. That's when that standard went out for community and technical review, and the standard was ratified in 2024, in February this year. I want to talk a little bit about the data standard itself. So the central concept in Latimer Core is this thing called the object group. And as this name suggests, this class represents the concept of the collection that you're describing with Latimer Core. And as I've said, it can represent a group of more than one collection objects. That's really it. So that could be from a whole collection or a drawer level. So thinking about the properties of an object group. So what data can you kind of attach and describe that object group with? So these are broadly divided into ones which can describe the group as a whole, such as its name, description, conditions of access, and those which describe the properties of the objects within that group. For example, the type of object and the preservation method. Now, there's a lot of other information that you may also want to associate with that group of objects. So within the wider standard, we've got a rich set of descriptors in the form of classes that describe more complex characteristics. And that includes things like taxonomy and stratigraphy. There's also classes for representing custodianship and management of the object group, including organizational units, which can be used to represent the institution and subunits within the institution as well. And then there's also a set of generic reusable classes that represent common concepts such as people, identifiers, and events, and also making sure to reuse things like measurement of fact, which is in Darwin Core ABCD, and that supports a whole bunch of very flexible narratives that allow you to provide quantitative and qualitative information about your collections. So, how do we envisage Latimer Core being used? So for collection surveys and creating dashboards about your collections, and I'll give some examples of that. For collections discovery, inventorying and assessment. For creating narratives and thinking about thematic collections. For describing draw or kind of lot level information about collections. For moving and space planning, and generally for collections management. In terms of proofs of concepts, so we've used it in a couple of different ways already. So we have an internal audit that we've used, which provided some of the data for the Unlock program at NHM. So Join the Dots was essentially a large-scale audit. It predates Latimer Core, but follows many of the concepts and inspired a lot of the thought that we had when we were working on it. And this is really an application for discovery, understanding collection demographics and strategic assessment on a big collection with relatively large proportion of undigitized material. In Synthesis, which I think is a program many of you will be aware of, this used Latimer Core to bring together collection surveys and dashboards across that European community. And Disco UK and Disco Flanders are using this from some of the survey information you've already submitted to understand our holdings, both in Flanders and the UK. It's also being used more widely. So we've heard about GRSciColl, so GBIF's big kind of collections metadata portal. So they're planning on integrating Latimer Core, and Disco Europe is also going to have a big collections digitization dashboard, which also uses, will use Latimer Core as the underlying standard. And one of the important things about data standards is that they have big community adoption to get traction. So we're using Latimer Core at the moment, and we can give a few examples about how we're using it. A lot of our prototypes are built on a cool bit of software called Airtable. Airtable is a low-code, cloud-based relational database platform. So you can make databases very easily there. It's good for kind of piloting this kind of thing. We've got a few interfaces on top of this, and we can export the data in this as Latimer Core compliant JSON files. We're also planning, we've got a project at the moment to digitize the Joseph Banks collection, and we're going to pilot getting all of that drawer information and the metadata about the collectors behind Banks's collection, as well as the specimen level data, and link that all together. So when and how can you all use Latimer Core? So I think in the short term, it will probably be providing institutional data to GRSciColl, and that is going to be a key part of Disco UK's delivery. And even if you're not using it directly, I think a lot of the concepts in the model can be useful for explaining how we represent groups of complex collection objects. And I think there's a lot of use cases where we want to describe groups of objects, historical groupings of objects or collectors or synoptic ones, I think are kind of clear and obvious use cases, but there are other ones too. But if you're, in some instances, it might be easier to use a spreadsheet, but for more complex ones, we're building some more tools so you can do it in a databasey way. There's a lot of resources online. We've got a comprehensive wiki. There's a standards homepage, which kind of gives a good overview to the standard. And there's also a standards browser that allows you to explore some of the classes and terms and definitions and see how it all fits together. So if you're more a visual person, that one will be useful. And I thought I'd also give a shout out to Tadwig. So the work of Tadwig benefits contributions from everyone. You don't have to be a technical minded person to join Tadwig. It benefits from curators, researchers, registrars, taxonomic experts. The more people we have contributing to a data standard, the better it will be, the more useful it will be for all of us. So I'd encourage you to kind of think about getting involved. There are 3 standards that I want to highlight that Tadwig is working on, or biodiversity information standards are working on at the moment. MIDS, so minimum information about digital specimens, which a few of you have probably heard Elspeth Haston talk about over the past few years. So that's to understand what level a specimen has been digitized. Latimer Core, which is to create more descriptive information about a species concept, including phenomic information. And then modeling research expeditions. So there's a big need when we're kind of thinking about where a set of specimens were collected, either on a voyage or a physical expedition. So there is a standard developing that is in the process of forming, or has formed, I think, recently, a task group. So if that's something of interest to any of you, I encourage you to have a look at Tadwig and think about joining those community groups. And finally, I just want to thank the Tadwig Collections Description Group. As I'm sure you can imagine, developing a standard like this takes a lot of time and requires, input globally. So I'd like to thank this group of people. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Lance. Does anyone have any questions? So I just wanted to ask. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
We're nearly there. Are there any examples beyond the Natural History Museum and other nationals of Latimer Core being used to describe collections out there in the UK, or that we could look at on a smaller scale? I'm thinking
about
regional.
There's a few examples in America, aren't there? Oh, sorry. So yeah, we heard that. So I think there's a couple of examples in America of Latimer Core being used at collections level, right?
The pilots. I'm much thinking of a pilot stage. We need examples and actual use cases to start.
Yeah. Okay.
So just repeating what Matt said. So because we've just gone through the process of ratification, I think it's pretty early stages, so we don't have too many examples. But I'd say towards the end of the year, and when we have the Tadwig Spinach Conference, we'll have a few examples of use cases for people to kind of look at and poke at. And the Joseph Banks collection, I think, will be a nice size and have lots of nice pictures and data associated with it. And it's a cool historical collection. So
yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much.